Story 1. Once, when I was a child, I was invited to stay for dinner at a friend's house. My friend's mother poured a large amount of ketchup into a cereal bowl, and the entire family casually dipped their fingers into it and licked them throughout the meal. Story 2. Stayed the night at this young woman's house and got up early to make some breakfast. I was rifling through the cabinets looking for salt and pepper to add to my eggs. Turns out this woman has no spices in her house. Not even salt. Like what? Story 3. I was watching their puppies and was told extra blankets were in the bottom drawer. The do-it-yourself adult toy mold kit was also there. Story 4. A sandbox in the middle of the living room. There were Tonka trucks, toys, and cigarette butts in it. Then came the cat. Story 5. Went over to have a post-work smoke session. The man's wife was strung out. Toddler just hanging out, an infant in a playpen. Both unsupervised, dog-free roaming, cigarette butts put out everywhere, and piles of dog waste all over the house. I left immediately instead of smoking and told him exactly why, because his house was disgusting and I did not feel comfortable getting intoxicated in front of children. Then I reported him to Child Protective Services and called my boss to let him know that if the coworker did not show up, it was because I called Child Protective Services on him. My boss was pretty understanding about it. The man lost his job because of the charges he faced. They found methamphetamine, cocaine, marijuana, arrested him for distribution, possession, illegal firearm possession, child endangerment, child neglect, abuse of a minor, apparently the children were severely malnourished, and misuse of welfare benefits, specifically the Women, Infants, and Children program. Story 6. I better appreciated that a friend of mine was badly depressed when I saw how messy his home was. I wanted to let him know if he needed anything I would do my best to help, but I did not want to just say, "Hey, let me help." Story 7. I was once a bartender in an affluent area. I would occasionally get invited to after-parties with the regular customers. More than once, I saw large homes barely furnished, with multiple rooms completely empty. They just lived in maybe 2 rooms of the house. It appears that these people would buy or even rent the homes to maintain appearances. Story 8. One family I visited had a room in their house set up for a college student. Posters, television, some weights, a computer desk, and even a half-empty cologne bottle on the desk. I asked which college their son attended, and they immediately changed the subject. The mother looked down and away. They said the room was rented out. I later found out their son could not get into the college he wanted and decided to commit suicide. They left his room exactly as it was. I still think about them. Story 9. Trick-or-treating as a child. We were always scared to go to one neighbor's house. The yard and home were not well kept. Stories circulated the neighborhood for years that he was a mean man and had killed his family. As a dare, I ran up and rang the doorbell. As I tried to run away, an older gentleman opened the door. He said, "I don't get many kids nowadays. Happy Halloween," and held out a bowl of candy bars. I peeked inside and saw a meticulously kept home. A little candle was lit. Neatly folded blankets and magazines were next to his recliner chair. He was very kind. I believe his children were grown and had moved away, and his wife had passed away years ago. This experience made me not believe the rumors that get started about people. Story 10. A girl I hung out with in college invited me over to study together. We did not have dorms. We lived close enough to walk to college, so it was at her house. I saw a small colorful urn on her TV stand and said, "Oh, that's a pretty pot." She gave a really sad smile and replied, "Thanks, that is my daughter." I felt so bad. Story 11. I am a crime scene investigator. I responded to a residential burglary when I worked at an agency in North Carolina. The homeowners were in their 70s. Their house was a typical grandparents' place with lace doilies everywhere, flowers, and photos of the entire extended family on the walls. A table near his chair had hunting and fishing magazines. A table near her chair held knitting needles and yarn. It was everything you would expect to see at Grandma and Grandpa's house. As the lady showed me around with the officer explaining what was stolen or moved, I came to a slightly ajar door next to the master bedroom suite. I asked if anything had been moved in there. She said she wasn't sure since she had called the police immediately after they got home from church and realized their house had been broken into. I pushed the door open. Inside was a fully equipped sex dungeon. There was a sex swing, hooks on the ceiling with ropes, restraints on boards nailed to the wall, cuffs, paddles, floggers, strap-on harnesses on hooks, ball gags of various sizes, and a video camera on a tripod, you name it. She looked around, put her hand on her chest, and with a sigh of relief said, "No, thank you, Lord. It looks like nothing was touched in here. I will never look at an elderly woman in a Peter Pan collar and flower-patterned dress the same way again." Story 12. Their Labrador was in a crate so small it could only turn around with great difficulty. The crate was anchored to the wall because otherwise the dog would thrash around until it shook and moved across the floor. I asked if the dog had done something wrong to be put in timeout in the crate, like chewing up some shoes. My friend said no, that was just where the dog lived for the most part. It got out every so often to eat or go to the toilet in the yard, but at all other times of day and night it was crated. Their reasoning was that when they let it out of the crate, it was too hyper and destructive. Probably because it spent its whole life stuck in a tiny box. I argued with the friend and left the house on bad terms. I did phone an animal rights hotline but was told there was nothing they could do. Since the dog was technically provided food, shelter, and decently hygienic conditions, it was not illegal to crate them nearly constantly, even though the organization agreed it was neglectful and abusive. Story 13. The woman I nannied for had a very messy house, but she always looked so put together in public. She had 6 children and always said, "Don't judge me. Our house is lived in." It made me realize that it is okay not to sacrifice your life for a perfect image, as long as everyone and everything is functioning. Story 14. A carpeted bathroom that contains a gun safe, wine glasses, a wine refrigerator, board games, and snacks. Story 15. Super popular, rich kid in high school. Drove a BMW, had a huge house, and both of his parents were doctors. Went to a party at his house one night and was absolutely horrified by the filth. There was dog waste everywhere in the house and little chihuahuas running around. Then there were even more dogs stacked on top of each other in crates in the garage. I was so stunned and disgusted I could not have fun and was just horrified for the animals and him because he obviously thought this was all normal. Because he was popular, people were not saying anything. All I could think was, if this is what his house looks like when he knows people are coming over, what does it normally look like? I still feel terrible for those dogs and wish I had told an adult who could have helped them. Story 16. Child pornography. Way back in the past, I worked as an installation and repair technician for a major telecommunications company. Installing digital subscriber line was one of the things I did, and while testing the connection to one person's computer, I came across very disturbing images. His line was working fine, so I just smiled, told him there was no charge, and left. I called the police first, and then my supervisor to inform him that I might be busy giving a statement for the rest of the day. The individual was severely arrested. Story 17. Hundreds of nutcracker dolls filled every square inch of space. This was not just at Christmas. It was in the middle of summer. Story 18. I had a roommate once who went away for a while. While he was gone, we went into the basement for something and discovered that he and his best friend were making papier-mâché molds of each other's bodies. Dozens of full body casts all over the basement. It was very unsettling. Story 19. My husband's aunt is white and is married to a black man. When you enter their house, there is an entire wall with a painted velvet canvas of a beautiful black woman in her full glory, including her breasts and pubic hair. When you sit in the living room, she is there. Story 20. If I had not known my neighbor when I was growing up was a World War II veteran and the coat was a war trophy, it would have been the Schutzstaffel officer's jacket he had in his closet. Fresh and never worn, he pulled it off a wagon somewhere in France. Without the context, it would have been a massive red flag. Instead, he and his wife were a sweet couple who were always happy to tell my brother and me stories from the war. He served in Europe. She served in the Pentagon writing letters to families of fallen soldiers. I miss them still more than 20 years after they passed on. Story 21. I was dating a girl for a couple of weeks and went to hang out with a couple she was close friends with. We were at their house, hanging out and having a pretty good time. They seemed pretty cool. The guy started talking about the iguanas they had and asked if I wanted to see them. They had a separate room for them. We went in there and saw the big cages with lizards. They were very impressive. On the wall next to them were large Ku Klux Klan posters. I made an excuse to leave their home soon after. My girlfriend asked what was wrong, and I explained what I saw. She knew and didn't think it was any big deal. That ended the relationship as well. Story 22. I have met a few people who were hoarders. They did not strike me as hoarders until I saw their house. Story 23. They had a bunch of framed pictures of family members on the wall, and among them was a picture of Ted Bundy. The black and white photo showed him grinning at something off camera when he was on trial. It was an old lady's home and was otherwise nicely furnished. It was not the roughest house I have been to for work, but it definitely had me scratching my head. Story 24. When my wife worked for a small company, we were occasionally voluntold to attend company gatherings. One of these events was at his house, a barbecue. Not that strange, right? What was strange was the 5-foot-wide, professionally painted picture of his wife, completely nude, on a beach in the living room. Story 25. A guy I had a crush on did not put sheets on his bed. It was very gross and strange. His mattress was dirty, and I could not imagine how it would ever get clean. I could not get past it, and it did not work out. Story 26. Neighbor has at least a dozen extremely high-quality hand-painted portraits of President Barack Obama as an African king, high-rolling gangster Jesus, walking hand-in-hand with Martin Luther King Jr., playing basketball on the streets, smoking marijuana by a burning trash can, and other unusual ones. It has been a few years since I saw them, but wow, the neighbor worships Barack Obama, and I had no idea. He never speaks a word of politics. He invited me over for dinner and told me all about the artist and how proud he was to have custom pieces by him. He never mentioned anything political. He just spoke about Barack Obama like he was a sports or religious icon. Story 27. I was a farmhand living on-site while I was in my late teens. I accepted the job over the phone and had no way of screening the property. Almost 15 years ago, I was a poor kid and desperately wanted the opportunity to work for this rancher. As soon as I entered the house, my stomach fell. The fridge could have earned a top 5 placing on hoarders. The walls and windows had holes in them, with roots and branches growing inside, some curled into the carpet and radiator parts behind the fridge. In the laundry room, mushrooms grew in the cracks of the foundation. On one of my final days, upon hearing a commotion in the basement, I discovered a mattress set I still cannot accurately describe. Imagine it caught in a flood, pressed by waters through the panels of a livestock yard, then left to dry in a damp basement. It became the final resting place for a long-disappeared house cat, and I will never forget the sight of it. The animal had been decomposing for some length of time. Red flags from the doorway in every doorway and the basement. Story 28. One of my best friend's father was always really hostile towards me, and I couldn't figure out why. We were hanging out in his garage one day, and I found his father's pistol that had a Nazi symbol scratched on the barrel. Story 29. I go into multiple homes every week. For the most part, people are clean and what I would call normal. Then we have the people whose animals do not get let outside often enough, or the litter boxes are not cleaned frequently, or the children have free run of the home and no one cleans for them. That is normal to some people. We also have a large group of people who collect odd or old things. They cannot let go of the past or of great-grandma's tarnished brass. That is also normal to some. The worst, to me, are the hoarders. With just a pathway leading to a tight space for one, they expect me to adapt to their living conditions while finding a place to sign multiple documents. Some claim to be remodeling. Others say they are moving in or out. It is obvious their claims are untrue. What gets me about these hoarders is that if they are not sick and in bed on their final days, they are business professionals who walk right next to others, looking tidy and clean. They are doctors and nurses, attorneys, accountants, and some even own multiple properties across the country. I have learned that we really do not know a person until we have seen their home. Story 30. I was cat-sitting for my friends while they were out of the country. I walked into their kitchen, and one of them had written, "Don't bully me." I'll come with the fridge alphabet magnets. I knew they were funny, but I didn't know they were that funny. Story 31. Hoarding and poor food hygiene. Edit. Different people, but I wish I had used this as my original response. Wall-to-wall carpeting in the kitchen. Story 32. When my friend and his wife could always afford new shoes, outfits, and nights out with various substances, but their kids slept on a mattress on the floor with no sheets. Where are your priorities? Story 33. I worked on the outside of a house one time, working around a window, and I could see 2 dead hummingbirds sitting on the windowsill inside. Not taxidermy, just lying there dead. Horrible. Story 34. The dirtiest bathroom I have ever seen. The cleanest anything I have ever seen. Everything had plastic covers to keep it clean. The couch had plastic covers, the rugs, chairs in the kitchen, handrails on the stairs, everything. I was about 9 years old and went to dinner and to watch television at this kid's house. He asked his mother if we could take the plastic off the couch to watch television. Mom brought out clean pajamas for both of us. She explained that everyone gets so dirty in that house they have to wear the clean pajamas she has ready if they want to sit on the couch. When Dad came home and saw the cover off the couch, he put on his clean pajamas too and joined us. The older kids and Dad all worked on cars and engines and were always covered in grease. Story 35. When I was little, I was at my friend's house, and we played hide and seek. I hid under his parents' bed. I was very confused about why people would have a severed penis that was so big. Story 36. My in-laws' place was completely hoarded. I wanted to impress them the first time I met them because I was looking to marry my now partner. I was planning a salmon meal with several courses leading to it. I ended up spending 4 hours cleaning before I could finally prepare the meal. It was horrible, and that smell is something I will never forget. They seemed unaware of it. I have never set foot on that property again and never will. Story 37. I used to have some friends that I met through doing animal rescue. They were a little odd, but you get that in that field. They brought their dog over to our house one time, and it urinated in our living room while they just watched me clean it up. That should have been my clue. The new owner of their property was evicting them so he could bulldoze the house. I wasn't working at the time, so my brother and I offered to help them pack their things into a rental truck. When we got inside their tiny 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom house, it was thigh-high with hoarded items, filthy clutter, covered in mouse droppings and cat urine. I left immediately when I saw the tarantula in the laundry room. Not a pet, just a loose, wild tarantula in their laundry room. Never again. Story 38. Their kids did not have top sheets, and their mattresses were gray. The rest of the house was a disaster as well. But to give someone a tour of your home when it looks like a pigsty? That is a no from me, dog. Story 39. A cat was restricted to a basement. Granted, the basement was quite large and smelled like it was recently cleaned. It had food and a water fountain. However, the poor animal spent all day meowing at the door because it needed love and companionship. Story 40. My friends moved into an apartment in the complex about 6 months after me. They were not very organized, but during the 2 years they lived there, they had an Amazon box with a yellow hand towel over it and a 6-plug power strip inside. It was on the floor behind their table, and I nearly tripped on it multiple times, but it was never moved. The 2 brothers eventually bought a house, and when I visited, that box was sitting in their living room. I doubt they noticed and just thought it was a box to clean later, but I bet it is still there, 7 years since I last visited them. What makes it strange is that the older brother is a massive germaphobe, but they live in what I can only describe as the enclave of the man-child. Story 41. There was a pack of chicken breasts in the refrigerator. However, it was completely open, and he left it that way, taking only one piece when needed. Having raw chicken open in the refrigerator made me question some things. Story 42. Come on, Reddit. Why isn't it ever something nice? Like, all of their neighbors took down their fences and share one giant backyard with a neighborhood library, clubhouse, and a refrigerator full of organic produce. Story 43. I did maintenance for apartments. One had crushed velvet everything and a shrine to Tupac, with the centerpiece being a statue of Tupac as Jesus. Story 44. Rotten food on the counter and trash everywhere. I had to hold back gagging when we went inside. He has the audacity to judge us on our drinking, yet he lives in a straight-up garbage can. Story 45. Went over to my mother-in-law's home care nurse's 50th birthday. She invited the whole family over, and there were many people. I had to use the bathroom and noticed she had left anal beads beside her bed. I thought, damn girl, you're saucy. Story 46. A married couple, both medical doctors with children. They had a tall, giant outdoor propane heater in their living room, like the ones used for outdoor seating at restaurants. It was running on propane with no fans or open windows. I told them they needed to stop using it. Story 47. My neighbor showed me his house. One room had a huge collection of Sambo dolls. The entire wall was covered with blackface minstrel figurines. I said, dude, what is this? Story 48. I drove nearly 5 hours to meet a man I had been talking to online for months. When I arrived at his place, the bathroom had an unflushed toilet with visible waste that had been soaking for a while. I left immediately. Story 49. Black mold in the shower. It was our 5th date, I think. He was a nice guy, very smart and kind, and I went to his apartment that he shared with a roommate. The whole place was a pit, but when I saw that shower, I knew I had to call things off. Luckily, the coronavirus lockdown started a couple of days later, and we just stopped texting each other. Story 50, February 2020. I was talking to a lady on OkCupid, and we agreed to be friends with benefits and hang out. She was a bigger woman, not normally my type, but her photos were kind of attractive. I liked how her hair looked and how confident she appeared. I drove 40 minutes to her place. I asked if she could meet me outside, but she couldn't. I forgot why. Took me some time to find her place. When I did and knocked on her door, she answered. She was not at all like her photos. Her hair looked different, and sadly, she was almost the opposite of her pictures. She had terrible posture and a hump. I felt sad immediately. She had catfished me with those photos. I wasn't rude or angry. I smiled and gestured for a hug, but she didn't notice because she immediately turned around after opening the door and walked to her couch. When I walked in, I was overwhelmed by the strong smell of incense burning. It filled the air. I sat down on her couch and noticed she had 4 cats. Looking around the room, I saw large murals covering the walls. Each mural contained photos, paintings, and memorabilia. There were about 5 murals. I couldn't believe how bizarre it was. She didn't talk or try to start a conversation. She went straight to a spot on the couch to watch a murder or crime show. So, you have a lot of cats, I said. She replied, yeah, I had 6, but 2 of them died. I looked at the 5 murals of 5 different cats. The math didn't add up. I wanted to ask if that happened recently, but instead, I asked to leave. She said, all right, with no expression. I felt bad for her, but that was the last time I used OkCupid. Story 51. A couple of weeks ago, I was at a friend's house who lives with her father. I noticed a box with a Ku Klux Klan symbol on it and the typical white hooded robe figure. When they were not looking, I picked it up and opened it. Inside was a very sharp knife with the letters Ku Klux Klan engraved on it and a watch. There was also a letter about initiation and how they aim to protect the weak and vulnerable. I felt a bit uneasy after that. Story 52. Naked photos of people on their walls did not make me think any less of them. I just do not personally have the courage to invite a group of coworkers over knowing they would see that. So, I guess if anything, I respect them more now. Story 53. I grew up on a farm, and when I was about 14, a neighbor who lived in a small cabin a couple of kilometers away asked for help stacking some boards he was cutting on a small sawmill. I arrived early the next day to help, and he said he was just cooking breakfast and asked if I would like some eggs. I had already eaten, so I declined. We went inside. His cabin, which had nothing more than a bed in the corner, a wood stove, and an old rough-cut wooden floor. He pulled down his frying pan, picked up an old sock from the floor in the corner, wiped out the pan with it, dropped the sock back on the floor and started cracking eggs into the pan. I was suddenly glad I had not accepted his offer of breakfast. Story 54. Oh my gosh, yes, I actually have two stories. The first is the worst to me. I met a girl on a dating app. She is some kind of commander at the local Washington Air Force Base. She lived in a forested area. After 4 dates, she invited me back to her house to cook and spend the night. I was excited. I met her at the grocery store. We got food, and the first red flag should have been, we need a new pot to boil pasta and a wooden spoon. Then I noticed she had a random box in her back seat with paper bowls from work. I thought, weird, but maybe she does not want to do dishes. We were on her porch and I had my hands full with the pot, food, and spoon. She told me to step inside when she unlocked the door and close it while she found a light. I closed the door. It was basically pitch black for 5 seconds, except for the moonlight creeping in through the window. The light flipped on, and the walls seemed to move. There were literally thousands of bugs, roaches, flies, ants, and other insects. I looked around and saw fleas visibly jumping across the linoleum. I dropped the pot and food in shock. I looked down at my nice suit pants and saw tiny bugs on them. I looked up to see what she would do, and she was not bothered at all. She said, "Ugh, sorry. My roommate did not do the dishes. There was a stack so high you could not open the cabinets. They were caked in days-old food and covered in millions of moving things." She opened the fridge, grabbed a cider, and said, "Want one?" I left immediately. It was about 45 degrees outside. I stood at my trunk, took off my clothes, and tossed them in store bags. By the time I was in my boxers, with clear flea bites on my legs already, she walked out and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I cannot do this. This is hell." She accused me of being prissy and a pansy. This is the country. You get bugs. I did not care. I ended up keeping my clothes outside when the temperature dropped to 25 degrees. I drove 90 miles home in my underwear, itching nonstop. I never wanted to see her again. I tell this story to all my friends and new people I meet. It is my cautionary tale of, sometimes people can hide what their lives are really like when they want to date you. I will share the second story when I am home. Story 55. He was a perfectly normal, well-dressed, and successful professional. I went to his house and found hoarder-level piles of old newspapers and magazines in several rooms and on each stair landing. Story 56. I don't really have an answer, but I feel much better about my slightly messy, cluttered house after reading through these intense hoarding and filth comments. Story 57. My adult friends do not have hand soap in their kitchen, only a small bottle of Dawn Power Spray. These are also the same people who never wash their hands after going to the bathroom. They flush and immediately leave. This is why I do not invite friends over to my house. Story 58. I went to a friend's house to play video games one summer afternoon, and his dog defecated on the carpet. I said, "Hey, I think your dog just pooped on the floor," and he just shrugged and kept playing. I then started noticing dog feces under the couch and along the walls, almost out of sight. When we were in the kitchen, I saw his backyard had more dog waste than grass. I don't think I ever went back to his house after that, which is a shame because he was a nice guy who just wasn't raised to understand how important it is not to live surrounded by dog waste. Story 59. I did home visits for students from poverty. Some were refugees, others were here on asylum or farm work programs. Their houses were clean, mopped, and dusted daily. Gardens were immaculate. Kitchens were well organized. I expected their homes to look like the homes of poor Americans, but they treated their new homes in America like castles and welcomed our visits. Story 60. Hospice nurse. Met this lovely couple and immediately fell in love with them. The husband is terminal. The wife and I were sitting at the kitchen table reviewing everything. I am required to ask if there are any weapons in the home. The sweet wife reached over and grabbed a pistol off the top of her china cabinet. It was on top of one of those Trump Bibles, which was in front of an 8x10 photo of Donald Trump. She said, "We have this thing. It's our Obama gun." I said, "I'm sorry." She said, "Oh, in case Barack Obama ever comes around." Story 61. I grew up in a farming area, and one of our neighbors was a sweet old man who grew grapes. We called him Uncle Georgi. One day, he and his wife had to leave for a couple of weeks, and he offered me $20 per day to water his plants. His plants turned out to be about 4 dozen intricate bonsai trees, each with exact watering instructions. Uncle Georgi was a former Greek Olympian who had fled Greece during the junta. I was fairly young at the time. This experience changed how I saw Uncle Georgi and everyone else. It was the moment I realized that other people are real individuals, not just characters that appeared when I was born. Story 62. I know a person whose entire house is filled with items related to Donald Trump. There are Trump blankets on the couch and chairs, Trump plates and cups, Trump soap, and some Biden and Barack Obama toilet paper. Vases with Trump flags are everywhere. In the dining room, there is a large framed picture of Donald Trump and his wife. The mantel in the living room has several framed pictures of him displayed on easels. Story 63. My ex had an aunt who was a genuinely lovely, if quirky, woman. She was always involved in grand plans to attend art events and try to present music or poetry. She also loved throwing parties and hunting for that unique collectible no one in her circles had yet begun collecting. As she put it, she wanted to be the first to discover the next great artist. None of this was snooty or aggressive. It was simply her way of exploring new ideas and expressing her wannabe hippie spirit. A few years later, she discovered estate sales and began attending them regularly. She finally found her sought-after collectibles. Since we all lived apart, she would call us enthusiastically about these gorgeous birds she had found. Brightly colored, glass pieces filled with intricate detail. They were clearly handmade and stunning. This was before cell phones were common, so she had no way to share photos of her glass menagerie. To cut this short, we eventually got the chance to visit her for Thanksgiving. She was so excited to show us her art collection. After the usual greetings, she led us into the sitting room where her 2 adult sons were sitting quietly, making awkward eye contact. She raised her hands to a shelf above the television and proudly began showing us her hard-earned collection of glass birds. Her face was genuinely proud, and my boyfriend and I looked at the collection with a dawning mix of horror and awe. Auntie had carefully hunted and paid good money for glass dildos of various sizes. These were definitely display pieces. I hope that was their only use. But they were in no way birds. My eyes moved to the 2 grown cousins, who were red-faced with embarrassment and shame. My boyfriend stood beside me, smirking and trying desperately not to burst out laughing at what was clearly a forest of cocks. Auntie began taking down some of her favorite birds, explaining how she found a lovely penguin or a fancy pigeon at estate sales. She wondered how no one else had discovered these incredible pieces of artwork. Then she showed us her favorite find, a dichromatic glass piece with green, gold, and blue hues. She hugged it lovingly and protectively, saying, "And this is my favorite one of all, a peacock." My boyfriend's reaction was explosive. This 6'2" tall man folded to his knees, crumpling like paper in a fit of uncontrollable laughter. He was gone. Poor Auntie had no idea what had happened. She looked to her sons. One had buried his face in the couch armrest to avoid laughing, and the other just stared at his mother in disbelief. "Was it something I said?" she asked, genuinely confused. "Mom!" Her eldest son tried to keep cool. "Those aren't birds. They're dildos." The penny dropped as Auntie took a second look at the peacock in her hand. In the end, it was decided Auntie wouldn't drive until her eyesight was checked and her eyeglass prescription updated. All in all, it was a tasty dinner, and my now ex-boyfriend talked about that infamous bird collection for many years. As for how it changed my view of Auntie, it certainly made her a more fun and interesting person. She handled the whole situation with grace and always seemed to get a giggle out of it all. She was a truly awesome lady, and I hope she's still out there, chasing her next big art discovery. Story 64. I was freshly 21 and very drunk with coworkers and some of my boss's friends. When the bars closed, we went to the home of one of my boss's friends, a man around 40 years old. They constantly talked negatively about this man's wife. The home was very nice, located in an expensive area, and beautifully decorated. I watched one of my friends, a 31-year-old woman, make out with him on his couch. I realized I was surrounded by a group of adults with no respect for boundaries or commitments. Story 65. Went on a date with a very attractive woman. We instantly connected and had a great night. She invited me back to her condominium, and when we sat down in her living room, I noticed a set of binoculars on her side table. I asked what they were for. Her response was something like, "Sometimes I just like to look into people's places and see what they are up to." Completely weirded me out. Still had a great time though. Story 66. There are numerous chickens in cages in the living room, dog waste everywhere because the dog was never trained, and no soap in the bathroom. This is a very unsanitary situation. Story 67. I used to walk dogs for an agency in a college town. I never met the people, just the dogs. There was one house that I assumed was owned by a party girl. Walks were always scheduled last minute, and when I got to the house, there would be high heels and club clothes scattered up the stairs. The bed would be completely unmade with lingerie on the floor. So, in my head, the client was a spoiled graduate student who would have us walk her dog after a hard night out. Then one day, I saw a parking pass sitting on the counter that said, "Transplant physician," and allowed her to park basically anywhere at the hospital campus. I checked with my boss, who booked all the walks, and she confirmed that this client was a transplant surgeon, possibly a resident, who would book last minute when called into an unscheduled transplant surgery. Story 68. I saw my best friend washing her baby's bottom in the sink. I have known her for 20 years. I never thought she had bad hygiene before. I went to her place. We were eating in the kitchen when her 1-year-old baby pooped in the diaper. My friend then washed the baby's bottom in the sink where dishes were still inside. I did not see her wash her hands thoroughly after changing the diaper. I lost all my appetite and felt like vomiting. I do not have a baby. I asked parents about washing a baby's bottom in the sink, and they were all shocked to hear it. Now I do not want to visit my friend's house anymore, nor do I want her to prepare food for me. Story 69. I went to hang out at a guy's house to watch movies once. He was very cute and funny, and I really wish his house hadn't been so gross. Everything was covered in a layer of dust, cat hair, and trash. He had 2 long-haired cats that he never brushed, so their fur was extremely knotted. He also had a recliner that only the cats sat in, but he didn't tell me until I noticed clumps of cat hair on my leggings and shirt. I have a long-haired cat myself and love cats, but I have never seen that much cat hair in a home. He also had about a 2-foot by 2-foot corner in the living room where he threw trash. There was no trash can or bag, just a big pile of trash on the floor. The kitchen was very dirty. There was a broken ceramic cat bowl for the cats, with food spilling onto the floor. At over 30 years old, are those habits pretty much set in stone? Story 70. One time I accompanied my friend to buy a vintage car from a dentist in the neighboring town. The dentist maintained the car in excellent condition and had receipts and proof of all the work done on the car. Most of the receipts were stored in a folder on his computer. While trying to pull up the receipts, he accidentally opened a large collection of homemade adult content. There were many pictures showing explicit scenes. He panicked and tried to close the files, but only scrolled through more revealing content. My friend and I were 18 at the time. Initially, I thought he was just clumsy trying to exit the files, but now as an adult, I sometimes wonder if it was intentional. Despite this, my friend still bought the car. Story 71. When I used to mount televisions for a living, there was a small subset of people who were very particular about their television placement, and yet they were hoarders. Magazines, documents, and newspapers were stacked all around outside of a single walkway. 2 of 3 couch cushions were covered by random obsolete phones, typewriters, and other items. Whenever I would move a stack that was in the way of the path to the mounting wall or mounting site, they would flinch and almost want to say something, then become forlorn. It was as if they had a mental overload. After that, they would agree to anything and everything that I reasonably suggested regarding their mounting. I always made sure to get it perfect for them. They all knew that they were hoarders to a degree. All they wanted was to have fun splurging on a nice television and having it put in the perfect spot. They knew very well that they could not have dinner parties, family stayovers, or their children back in town. Despite their constant chaos, they could at least have their relief, a brand new television. But even then, the hoarding got in the way. I always felt so bad for those clients. They were always well-meaning people, but the look in their eyes as I left, I will never forget. Just lost. Even after the job was done, saying goodbye was always the worst. I did everything they wanted, but I knew their secret. They always looked so sad, knowing that their secret was out to someone. We both knew I would never tell anyone specifically, but there was an air of uneasiness. It made me view hoarders in so much more of a human light. They are so silently desperate, and it breaks my heart. Story 72. When I was in elementary school, there was a teacher who was known for being mean. She often yelled or screamed at students for not listening, breaking rules, or doing foolish things. She wasn't married and didn't have children of her own, so everyone assumed she wasn't a very nice person. Her house was right across from my dentist, and every time we passed by, there was a Christmas tree lit in the window. It didn't matter what time of year, it was always up and lit. It had been like that for as long as I could remember. I was probably 9 years old at the time. Flash forward to the summer of 2009 at Vacation Bible School. She was one of the leaders each summer, and I decided to ask, "Why do you always have a Christmas tree up?" Turns out she had a son once, a teenager who died tragically around Christmas. The last thing they did together was set up that Christmas tree. She keeps it up as a way of remembering him. She didn't want to disturb the way they had arranged it, so she never took it down. That conversation completely changed how I saw her and made me feel much more compassion when she became upset over kids not being safe or listening. When my peers made fun of her or called her mean, I began standing up for her and eventually convinced my friends and classmates to back off. Although I do not think it is acceptable for an adult outside a child's family to yell at children, I realized she did it because she wanted the kids to be safe and have a chance to grow up well. I have long since moved away from that town, but when I went to college, she still lived in that house, and the tree was still lit in the front window despite it being August. Every time I see a Christmas tree lit in a window, I think of her and her son. Story 73. Went over to my best friend's house, hadn't been by in a while. She had 2 young children, both under 5. She was a stay-at-home mom and her husband worked full-time. I walked in the door and their house was completely trashed. You could barely see the living room floor. There was a big box by the front door filled with dirty diapers. The wood floor was ruined. Dishes were everywhere. I understand 2 kids is a lot of work, but what do you do all day? I'd known her since we were in elementary school. Her mother had 3 kids, and their house was basically spotless. Her mother made them help clean, so it wasn't like she had no idea how to clean or grew up around filth. I had been best friends with this woman for over a decade at the time I saw her house like this, and I almost called Child Protective Services. That's how bad it was. While I was deciding whether or not to call Child Protective Services, her mother-in-law ended up doing it. Child Protective Services was involved in their lives for years after that. It was very sad to watch. Story 74. Whenever I see people with extra plastic Walmart, Publix, or grocery bags, I feel a sense of relief. It is not just me. Story 75. His toilet. Dude had lived there 1 year, and I could tell he hadn't cleaned his toilet once. It was caked in brown stains, and the seat was falling off. The first time I came over and walked toward the bathroom, he said, "It looks rough in there. I didn't get to clean up before you came." He had a bottle of hand sanitizer instead of soap, but at least it was something. I was intimate with him twice though. 2021 was bad for me. Story 76. Honestly, a large Confederate flag hanging across the entire dining room wall. It is their business, but I drew the line when they said the Pledge of Allegiance to it. Story 77. I had a rental and went to fix something. The renter had a small whiteboard with a shopping list. On the list, among items like food storage containers and a small trash can, was a penis pump. Story 78. One of our city's top high-powered attorneys at the time had a house. He had an 18-year-old daughter that I was interested in taking out. I was 19 or 20 at the time. She said I had to meet her dad first. I knew who he was and was a little intimidated. So I drove to the very upscale neighborhood they lived in my little beater car, and hung out with her, her mom, and sister while we waited for him to get home from work. As soon as I walked in the house, there was a framed letter from his high school guidance counselor saying he was a troublemaker and would never amount to anything and would likely end up in jail. Interesting. We then went to the kitchen and hung out until Dad got home. Once he did, we exchanged pleasantries, and he said, "I hear you're interested in taking my daughter out." I said I was. He said, "Okay, let's go chat." So he took me further into the house to his office, and this was where I was blown away. He opened the door, and it looked like a recording studio with a massive painting of Frank Zappa on a motorcycle on one wall. The other walls were covered in thousands of vinyl albums and a music studio-type stereo and recording system. He was apparently a massive audiophile. We settled back on a couch and talked while he learned about me. After a while, he opened a little box on his desk, pulled out a pre-rolled joint, and lit and smoked it without offering me any. I guess that was because I was getting ready to take his daughter out. We ended up talking for a while, and he said he liked me and that I could take his daughter out. We wrapped up and went back to the kitchen. The daughter and I walked outside with Mom and Dad, but when he saw my beater car, he said, "You can't take my daughter out in that. It doesn't look safe. Take my car," and handed me the keys to his shiny new BMW. I was so nervous driving that thing that night. The daughter and I never really worked out for a variety of reasons, but every time his name is brought up in my town or in the news, I always think about that office and how he was nothing like I expected. Story 79. I started dating a really cute girl. Retro pinup type, perfect makeup, and always put together very well. She invited me over to her place to hang out and watch some movies. She has a 10-year-old son, and he was spending the weekend at his grandmother's. Modest condo, a bit messy, nothing fancy. We started fooling around on the couch, and she suggested we go upstairs to her bedroom. We went upstairs, and the bedroom was completely empty except for a bare mattress on the floor. No sheets, no pillows, no clothes, not a single thing except the mattress. I was surprised. She said she had lived there for years and had a decent job. She pushed me onto the questionable mattress and had very intense, angry, and aggressive sex with me. It was seriously mind-blowing. Afterwards, we lay there cuddled together on the bare mattress like a couple of homeless people on a discarded mattress in a back alley, completely naked. I was the big spoon mostly because I was freezing all night. I should have just left, but the sex was amazing and she was very attractive. Eventually, I bought her a bed set. I think she was a bit offended, but I explained that I hated sleeping at her place because I was freezing at night and that I wasn't judging her. We dated about 9 months until she suddenly ghosted me. We had a few mutual friends, and I started to see her wedding photos pop up all over Facebook. Apparently, she had been engaged to someone in New York for a while, and I was just the side person until she got married. Just wow. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.